On October 8, 2025, the U.S. Senate faced a pivotal decision that would have far-reaching consequences for U.S. foreign policy and the balance of power in Washington. The issue at hand was whether to limit presidential military authority in Latin America, a region that has seen growing U.S. involvement and rising tensions in recent months. Senators gathered to vote on whether to open debate on new legislation designed to curb President Trump's ability to launch military strikes in the Caribbean without congressional oversight. The vote was close. 48 senators voted in favor of debating the measure, while 51 opposed it, effectively blocking any further discussion for now. This narrow victory for the White House means that President Trump can continue military operations in the region without needing explicit approval from Congress, a move that has sparked intense debate. Critics, including lawmakers and activists, argue that unchecked executive power could lead to escalating conflicts, destabilize Latin America, and undermine democratic checks and balances. The outcome highlights a deep and growing divide in Congress over war powers, with some senators insisting on greater oversight, while others defend the president's authority to act swiftly in times of crisis. Several senators have warned that failing to rein in executive power could lead to unintended consequences, including the risk of a wider regional conflict that could draw in more countries. With the Senate's decision, the president's military policy remains unchecked, raising urgent questions about the future of U.S. engagement in Latin America and the role of Congress in shaping foreign policy. A bipartisan group of senators, led by Adam Schiff and Tim Kaine, has launched a renewed effort to restore Congress's authority over decisions of war and peace. In recent years, lawmakers from both parties have grown increasingly concerned about the executive branch's expanding power to initiate military action without explicit approval from Congress. These senators sought to reclaim congressional war powers, arguing that the current system allows presidents to bypass the legislative branch when making critical decisions about military engagement. They point to the Constitution, which grants Congress the sole authority to declare war, as a foundational principle that must be protected to ensure democratic accountability. The proposed legislation would require the president to seek congressional approval before launching military operations, effectively halting unauthorized military actions unless Congress explicitly authorizes them. Senators cite the War Powers Resolution of 1973, which was designed to check presidential power, emphasizing the ongoing need for robust oversight and clear legal boundaries on military decisions. Growing concerns have emerged over the legality and precedent of unilateral military strikes, especially as new conflicts and threats arise around the world. A recent classified briefing left many senators with unanswered questions about the military's lethal tactics and the criteria used to justify such actions, fueling further debate. The push for greater oversight highlights widespread fears of targeting innocent individuals, escalating conflicts, and setting dangerous precedents that could undermine international norms. Ultimately, this effort calls for increased transparency, accountability, and a return to a more deliberative constitutional approach to foreign policy and the use of military force. Recent U.S. military strikes in the Caribbean have sparked intense debate. These operations, targeting vessels near Venezuela, mark a significant escalation in counter-narcotics strategy. The October 3rd strike resulted in 4 deaths, raising questions about targeting and accountability. Colombian President Petro claims a destroyed vessel was Colombian, complicating the narrative. The strikes risk diplomatic fallout and highlight flawed intelligence concerns. President Trump's rhetoric suggests potential expansion of military actions, alarming Congress. The possibility of ground operations raises fears of a larger conflict. Congress worries about rapid escalation and the lack of a clear strategy. The Senate is sharply divided over both the legality and the necessity of the recent military strikes. Lawmakers are locked in heated debate, with some questioning whether the administration has overstepped its constitutional authority, while others insist urgent action was required. Supporters argue the strikes are a strategic and decisive response to drug cartels that have grown increasingly bold, threatening U.S. security and the safety of American citizens. They believe military intervention sends a strong message to criminal organizations operating near the border. Proponents claim presidential authority allows for swift, decisive action in times of crisis, bypassing lengthy congressional procedures that could delay a necessary response. They argue that waiting for legislative approval could put lives at risk. Critics, however, warn that such actions risk destabilizing the entire region and dangerously blur the lines between military and law enforcement responsibilities. They caution that military involvement could escalate violence and undermine local governments. There are growing concerns over the potential for unintended conflicts, especially given the lack of clear, actionable intelligence. Some fear that acting on incomplete information could lead to disastrous consequences. Critics also fear that strikes based on flimsy or unverified evidence could result in civilian casualties, displacing families and harming innocents caught in the crossfire. Humanitarian groups warn of a looming crisis. At the heart of the debate is the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches, and the risk of unchecked military actions setting a dangerous precedent for future conflicts. The stakes are high, involving not only regional stability, but also the potential for long-term diplomatic fallout and unintended consequences that could reverberate far beyond the immediate crisis. The Senate's decision impacts U.S. military power and global perceptions. Unilateral military actions set a precedent for future presidents, eroding checks and balances. Latin American nations view the strikes as aggressive, risking alliances. The policy could isolate the U.S. and undermine regional cooperation. The debate raises questions about international law and military use in law enforcement. Global norms risk erosion if military force becomes a common response. The U.S. faces a choice: global enforcer or partner respecting international law. The ongoing strikes will shape U.S. policy and global leadership perceptions.